Hello and welcome to my channel. Today's video is on the science of Christianity, and I've come upon this topic in a very interesting way. I was in the grocery store and I was talking to a guy that has a doctorate in theology, and I've had many conversations with this fella, and I've told him about my publications, specifically the one on abiogenesis, also known as the origin of life. And after talking to him for a few times, one day he said, I have something in the car for you. And he brought this survey of the Bible, and he is a regular speaker at WFR Church in Monroe or near Monroe, Louisiana. It's either in Monroe or West Monroe. And his name's Scott Caldwell. And he told me that science doesn't have anything to do with the origin of life or creation or anything like that. And that was very weird to me because I've always thought that science was the best way to understand God. And I was born and raised Catholic right around here in Louisiana, a place called Thibodaux, Louisiana. And I have the Catholic faith instilled in me from a young age. And I believe my own version of God, but I think when it comes down to religious people and anyone who believes in God, whether they are religious or just have a spirituality, I think everyone has their own individual interpretation of who God is. So I wanted to make this video to try to explain my point of view, and maybe it can help connect this older gentleman to what I'm trying to say and maybe understand why God does play a role in science and science does play a role in understanding God. And throughout his survey, I'm going to show you parts of it that I have highlighted. For instance, right here. And I have pictures of it too throughout this whole video. And I'm going to discuss things that I agree and things that I disagree with it. So as I was saying, I was born and raised in Thibodaux, Louisiana, and I regularly took delightful trips in high school to New Orleans. Most people are familiar with New Orleans and are familiar with Mardi Gras and the other stuff that we like to do in South Louisiana. However, I came to Monroe, Louisiana, which is around right here, to get my doctorate in pharmacology and do breast cancer research while also doing research on the origin of life, which I'll show you in a few slides. So I think that this can resonate with many people because younger people are interested in how science is related to consciousness and God and other topics like that. While I think the older generation is still stuck on the fact that science and religion are somehow at odds and against each other. And you can see this statistically how the different generations are just maybe getting a little caught up in how things are worded and just generational stuff in church. And you can see that on average, people read the Bible about 67%, and then the younger people are actually reading the Bible a lot more than the older people, the older churchgoers. And then you can see the younger generations are a lot more happier and feel comfortable and are satisfied and feel like they're a part of the church, while the boomers are the least comfortable and satisfied and feel like they're part of the church. So I feel like that all of these numbers can improve and increase if we all try to talk about our own interpretations and what we mean by God. And even if you're an atheist, I think this is interesting to think about because it is part of the universe, and scientists like Einstein also believed in God. He always said he believed in the God of Spinoza or the God that consists of all the physical laws of the universe, because in some way we have to be created. In some way, everything was created. So if you want to just label that as God, or you want to label that as the universe or the laws of physics, I think we're all searching for the same truth. So to continue, this is my paper titled, me and my previous boss's paper titled Liquid-Liquid Phase Separation as a Driver of Abiogenesis and Evolution. And again, abiogenesis is just another way of saying the origin of life. And over here to the left, you can see that biological molecules can organize through liquid-liquid phase separation in a similar way that oil can organize itself in water. So that's a way it can organize without a membrane. So before membranes and cells existed, this is a way that life can come together. And then this is how it signals. And then this is how it creates the different structures of cells that ultimately create living things. And as far as the Catholic Church is concerned, evolution doesn't go against any of the teachings of the Catholic Church. If you want to read more on that, you can read about the Catholic Church accepts evolution, and Priest Sheen and what he did to put out word about the fact that evolution doesn't go against any of the Christian teachings in the Catholic Church. So I think that's a very interesting thing if you are a Catholic, because some Catholics might think that evolution goes against everything that's taught in church, but that's actually not true if you do some research on it. So let's get into it. So let's start with the Bible timeline. So he says the books of the Bible were written over a period of about 1500 years, from around 1450 BC to just about AD 100. Our English Bibles are translations from those original languages. And you can see here that the King James Version of the Bible, which is the Bible that most people read, was translated between 1604 and 1611 and published during 1611 AD. And you can see that they were written, as I've said, around 1400 to 1400 BC to about AD 90. So they were translated, they were written over 2,000 years ago, and then they were translated about 16 or 1500 years after. So things could be misinterpreted during translation. Things could be disorganized when things were passed down by word of mouth or retranslated in different languages from Greek to Hebrew and all kind of different languages I'm sure it was translated into. So a lot could have gotten lost in translation, so that I think that requires science from archaeologists, from different aspects of science to come together so we can gain a bigger understanding. So I think science has a direct impact on this. Biblical narrative records real historical events while showing how God worked through them to carry out his purpose in history. We might call it theological history. All historical narratives in the Bible represent a limited outline and summary of selected events. They do not provide a documentary of the history of the world. So he wrote that in the part labeled Essential Background for Understanding the Bible. And I think that just he's saying that it's basically theological history, it's not exact history. And I think that also brings in why science is needed to understand what was actually meant and how it can be used today. So to continue, he states in the section how ancient cultures differed from ours in their worship of many gods. The Bible states that Abraham's family worshiped many gods. when ancient people began to believe in new God, they did not abandon their old ones. So I think this is interesting because it's basically showing that ancient people, they had gods for reasons because these belief systems helped them live their life. And then whenever they needed a new belief system that they adapted, they didn't necessarily forget all the old gods they believed in. They just incorporated the new belief systems into their previous ones. So you can see this not only in the Abrahamic religions, but you can also see this in Greek and Egyptian religions, where as time went on, you had more and more gods emerge so that it could help them have perspectives in life that would guide their culture. So to continue, he says that ancient cultures did not think in terms of science, and they were unaware of the underlying scientific concepts that are automatic assumptions for us. So I think that is very interesting because I don't think any science is automatic assumptions. If anything, science is a way of thinking that can maybe alleviate those automatic assumptions, the errors in those automatic assumptions. So science is a way of thinking that I think even ancient people use, because we know even a long time ago, cavemen used rocks and learned how to carve rocks and make different weapons. So in a way, they were using a scientific way of thinking to figure that out. So just like they used it, I think Egyptians and the Abrahamic people, the Greeks, the Romans, they all used the scientific way of thinking. So I don't think this is necessarily true. And he has that under a section titled How Ancient Cultures Differed from Ours in Their Understanding of Science. All right, so let's continue. So he goes on to explain that common errors that lead to misinterpretation are treating figurative and symbolic language as though it is literal, and treating literal language as though it is figurative or symbolic. So that's two kind of contradictory statements. And he's basically saying that to interpret the Bible, you have to decide if the words are literal or symbolic. But the question is, who decides that? And I think that's up for debate, and that's up for everyone to talk about and gain an understanding. But I think saying that your way is the only way, I don't think that is the right way. I think that the right way is to talk about it and get on everyone's perspective. You shouldn't just say that science has nothing to do with science. Science has nothing to do with religion, um, because science definitely has something to do with religion. Because if you believe in God, if God created everything, then certainly He created science. So now let's get into some very interesting parts of this survey of the Bible. We're kind of done the background sections, and now we can get into where I think the older generations and the younger generations really aren't on the same page, and why maybe some of the older generations don't feel at home when they go to church and they hear what some of the younger generations think, and maybe even how, some of the younger generations think about how some of the older generations word things. So he says, our tendency is to begin by seeking to understand how to align the creation story with our current scientific views on the origin and operation of the universe. Such a scientific approach automatically misses the thrust of the story. So science misses the thrust. I think science actually understands the thrust very well. Have you ever heard of a rocket scientist? I think they understand thrust. All right. So I think this is very vague, not totally understanding what he means here. And I don't know how a scientific approach automatically misses the thrust of the story. So then he goes on, the first level it fails on is that it ignores the identity of the people to whom Genesis was written. Science tries to accept everything, tries to look at every aspect of everything down to the atom and molecule, particle. I don't think science is missing anything. I think science has a field that's looking at every different thing. So I don't know about that. The next level on which a scientific approach fails is that it ignores the culture of the people it was written to and how they would have understood the story. So I don't think science really misses that either. I think there's many different fields of science, like anthropology, that that rigorously studies human culture and writes papers upon papers, books, textbooks about human culture. I don't think science misses that. I don't think science misses that at all. The Israelites were aware of the creation stories of their day, which we call mythologies, and they would have compared Genesis with these stories instead of the modern Big Bang theory. So were they thinking about the Big Bang theory? I'm not sure. Maybe that's something that's in regards to the thrust of the story here. I'm not sure if there's a connection there. They were theological creation stories, not scientific ones. They note how the first gods emerged from the primeval water. So this is where I think he's thinking that were thinking symbolically, but I think they were actually thinking scientifically. I think they had to understand how nature worked in order to survive in nature. They didn't have technology like we had it, or like we have had it and have it today. So I think they may have had some understanding that maybe life did start in water, and now our understanding today is liquid-liquid phase separation. So we have just a more accurate way of saying it. So maybe in this instance, he was performing one of the errors he talked about previously, and he thought they were being symbolic, but really they were being literal. So then it gets a little bit more interesting, and he says other gods came into existence in various ways, including male gods and female goddesses having sex and giving birth to more gods, producing a family tree of gods. So this family tree is something we've seen in other religions too, like Egyptian religions and Greek religions. And the real questionable thing I think about this passage and why I put it here is because this guy also told me that the reason it's important to not teach science to the youth and to teach this translation of the Bible, this interpretation of the Bible, which is kind of like creationism, is because it's easy for the kids to understand. I don't think that's Do we really want to tell kids that gods had sex and that's how everything was created? I don't think so. If you look at some of my previous videos, I talk about perspectives coming together and how different perspectives coming together is a way to understand quantum mechanics and quantum interactions, which can scale all the way up to interactions of humans and interactions in stars and galaxies. So I think it's better just to understand it as perspectives coming together. I don't think we have to include sex in everything we're talking about. Let's just say the perspectives are coming together, and maybe that's a better way of getting your point across. So, oh, this is probably what he was talking about the thrust. He was talking about a rocket engine. That's what he was talking about when he mentioned the thrust. That has to be it. So what he meant by the thrust is that like God is the power that pushes everything along. So in a way, the thrust could be like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. It's what connects everything together and keeps things organizing and emerging in the universe. That's the thrust he was talking about. That makes a lot more sense. So he says a few other things in here that I would like to talk about. So we'll move on to what he has to say about passion. And this is my passion, would be research, which I'll get into. But for now, I just want to read two more sections from his survey of the Bible, and maybe y'all can tell me what y'all think about it and y'all views in the comments. So the importance, and he has this under what was affected by sin that God is working to restore. We ceased loving God with our whole hearts. Okay, so this is bullet point one. The importance of people having willing hearts to serve God is revealed by this question. What if God forgave the sins of everyone in the world right now? Would that give him what he wants? The answer is no. The result would be a world full of people in rebellion against God who are now forgiven and will live with him eternally. So, bullet two, living eternally with a world full of rebellious people is the opposite of what God desires. And this is the last bullet. This shows how the willingness of people to serve God from their hearts is a major issue in the overall picture of what God is working to accomplish. So, I don't really think this is a good interpretation either, because I don't think God is holding forgiveness over everyone's head. The God that I believe in is just and merciful. And even though that's a very hard thing to balance, I think that's why we should be humble when trying to think about it. He's not holding forgiveness over our heads, wouldn't be justice, or it wouldn't be very merciful. But I think God somehow balances both. And even though no human can do that perfectly, maybe if we all work together and give our perspective and interpretations, maybe we can get close to understanding how exactly God does that. So this is my last few bullet points that I would like to talk about from his survey of the Bible. And it's from Adam and Eve's sin, its consequences, and God's response. So, bullet point one, the primary human failure is misdirected worship. So, number two says, the reality is that if we do not worship the one true God, we will inevitably worship something else. Third bullet point, rather than honoring God and reflecting his image, humans give their loyalty to things like lust, power, money, security, fame. Next bullet point, our worship and devotion that should go to God gets redirected to our passions. Scripture teaches that worshiping anything but God has an unexpected side effect. It causes us to become participants with evil spiritual powers. We effectively hand over to those spiritual forces the power and authority that God intended for us to exercise. And he quotes 1 Corinthians 10:20. Now, he quotes the Bible several times throughout this survey of the Bible. And what I was taught in Catholic school is that even the devil can quote scripture. And I agree with that because anyone can quote scripture. And I think the devil and God, no matter what your belief system is, you can understand what they are. It's the good person on your shoulder, the good voice you hear to do the right thing, and the bad voice you hear to do the wrong thing. That's in a lot of old cartoons and stuff. It's the devil and the angel on your shoulder. So I think that even the devil can quote scripture, and that maybe that's why it has gotten misinterpreted in the past so much, because maybe people didn't maybe sometimes people were listening to the devil and didn't always have the right intentions. Okay. So I understand what he's saying, that if we only pursue our passions, we can get selfish. However, I don't think passion is necessarily a bad thing. I think that you can have perfectly good people that maybe don't go to church because they're working on a cure for cancer. They're helping people in a country that they don't have access to churches, and they're helping them get food. So you can have all these instances that people, I think, are still doing God's work, but they're not necessarily going to worship him in church. So I don't think pursuing your passion is always a negative thing. So that brings me to this slide in my passion, which was pursuing things like the origin of life, and pursuing a better understanding of cancer and metabolic disorders so people can combat them. So this is just an experiment I did to show that you can have cells plated in a dish, and then if you do certain treatments to those cells, they can start to defy gravity and start growing vertically, and it creates kind of like a spheroidal flower looking structure like this. And you can see that all of this green stuff is a protein called galectin-3, and it's associated all around this spheroid, this group of cells that's defying gravity and just growing vertically. That's why it's called a Z-stack, because you're not looking at the X or the Y portion, you're looking at the vertical Z portion of the plane. So, and these are just slices going through the Z position or the vertical position of the spheroid. So you can see in all the slices you have this green protein, galectin-3, and that green protein can initiate liquid-liquid phase separation by organizing water, which organizes the cells and allows them to grow vertically and defy gravity. So you can think about this as being an initiating point for the origin of animals, and it's almost like the proteins and biological molecules using the water to grow up and start making a multicellular organism. So I have a cool paper I'm working on coming out. It'll be my 11th publication, and it'll explain all the mechanisms of this a lot better. However, in my paper on liquid-liquid phase separation as a driver of abiogenesis and evolution, you can get all the details on how liquid-liquid phase separation plays a role in the origin of life and the evolution of multicellular organisms. But the exact transition from single cell to multi-cell, which has to do with the mitochondria, will be on a paper that's hopefully coming out soon. So speaking of the mitochondria, that brings me to this picture and to my cancer research. So this shows a bunch of MDA-MB231 highly metastatic human breast cancer cells. And you can see that the nuclei is stained blue, the cytoskeleton is stained red, and the green stain the cellular adhesions. However, under this treatment, whenever I disrupted the metabolic state of these cells, it caused a decrease in adhesion, so you have less green everywhere compared to other cells. But interestingly, you have an increase in these blue mitochondrial DNA that you can see all right here. And when you disrupt the metabolism in these cells, it causes the breast cancer cells to fuse together and create a giant syncytial cell. And a syncytial cell is defined by a bunch of different nuclei, which you can see right here, around an actin cytoskeleton, which you can see in red. And whenever these cells fuse together, whenever they're under metabolic stress, the DNA in the mitochondria also get enlarged, and that's why you can see them here. So a lot of these single cells fuse together to make this cell, and then in order to fuel this giant cell, you had to have an enlarged mitochondria. So that suggests that the mitochondria plays a vital role in cancer cell survival. So they're trying to survive under these metabolic stress. And I also starve them of serum. So they're trying to survive under this state, and one of their ways to survive is by enlarging and fusing not only the cells together, but also creating bigger and more mitochondria. So the mitochondria play a vital role in metastatic breast cancer, and the mitochondria play a role in many metabolic disorders. This kind of proves that cancer is a metabolic disorder and that we should be looking at the mitochondria a lot more. The mitochondria is also being investigated, and a lot of research is already developed on the role that it plays in the lifespan. So it's important to think about your metabolism, and you can extend your life by taking care of your mitochondria. So why might that be important? Because you can see that all the DNA here is stained blue. So why would the mitochondria have its own DNA? Well, it's because it's actually another organism. It's a bacterium. So about 2 billion years ago, a cell similar to our animal cells, which was called an archaea cell, fused together and lived in a symbiotic relationship and a symbiotic life with a bacterium, and that bacterium was the mitochondria. It was called alpha proteobacteria, which was a purple bacteria. So these bacteria have their own circular DNA, which we can now find in the mitochondria. So just like we're living in a civilization, and one single person doesn't really know the goals of the whole civilization, even though we might like to and try to, but we're part of it and we're working hard. The mitochondria is living within us and all of our cells, and even though it doesn't know our goals, it plays a small role in all of our cells, gives the cells energy. That's what gave the cells energy to make animal life on Earth. So if we don't give the correct environment for the mitochondria, then our metabolism gets dysregulated and cancer can get worse. So and many other metabolic disorders work like this as well, including fibrosis and diabetes are all metabolic disorders where the mitochondria plays a role. You can look it up on PubMed if you would like to read more about it. So I would suggest that everyone look into something called CoQ10 if and other dietary ways that you can help your mitochondria have a good environment to live in, because if they're happy, then your tissues are going to be happy and you'll be happy. So this is what I've spent a lot of my time and passion doing, and I don't think that it takes away from my beliefs in God or anything like that. I have my own beliefs in God. I think science and religion can both be combined, and I think in the future we'll see spirituality and science and culture all come together in a more beautiful way than we can imagine. So these are all my publications if you would like to check them out. I have 10 of them, but there will be one more coming out specifically on the mitochondria if it gets accepted. But I've been working hard on it. And if you would like to look at my research page, you can look up my ORCID, and that's kind of like an official website where you can see a scientist and all their publications, and you know that it's legit, it's legitimate. So you can find that here if you just want to double check, or you can just look at all my publications from here or look them up on Google. So to close, science asks us to remain curious, religion asks us to remain humble. Both ask us to seek truth. Whether you are religious or not, I hope we can agree on one thing. The pursuit of truth is always worthwhile, and if God is truth, then every honest scientific discovery brings us one step closer to understanding the universe and perhaps in its own way understanding God. So just like scientific theories improve and evolve from past theories, hopefully spirituality can do the same and maybe implement some of the things that science is coming upon, which a lot of people are doing, and I think a lot of churches are accepting. So if you like this, please give a like and subscribe so we can keep stuff like this coming, and you have a wonderful day.